It's the morning of February 9th, 1855. You step outside your front door in rural Devon, England, into fresh snow. And there, right at your doorstep, is a trail of strange hoof-shaped prints. You follow them. They go down the lane, over a wall, across someone's rooftop, through a garden, across a river, and they just keep going. For over 100 miles. And nobody saw what made them. This is one of the most genuinely baffling unsolved mysteries in British history. And tonight, we're going to walk that trail together. The winter of 1855 hit Devon hard. Snow blanketed the county's rolling hills, coastal towns, and inland villages. Places like Exmouth, Topsham, Dawlish, and Teignmouth. The kind of heavy, clean snowfall that makes perfect imprints. A natural canvas for whatever came next. On the night of February 8th, something moved through that landscape. And when people woke up the following morning, the evidence was everywhere. A single, continuous trail of cloven hoof-like prints, stamped into the snow as if burned there. These weren't scattered tracks. They weren't random. They formed a perfectly single-file line, one hoof in front of the other, like whatever made them walked on two legs, stretching across fields, through towns, and over every obstacle in its path. The first reports came from Topsham early that morning. Residents noticed the strange marks outside their doors and followed them, realizing quickly this wasn't any animal they knew. Each print measured roughly 4 inches long by 3 inches wide, shaped uncannily like a donkey's hoof. The spacing between prints was only 8 to 16 inches, a short, deliberate stride. But here's what stopped people cold. The trail didn't go around things. It went over them. Haystacks, fences, garden walls up to 12 feet high, rooftops. The prints appeared on one side, disappeared at the obstacle, and reappeared on the other, without disturbing the surrounding snow in any way that would suggest a jump or a climb. One account described prints leading directly into a drain pipe barely 4 inches wide and coming out the other side. Think about that. Whatever this was, it either squeezed through a 4-inch pipe or the laws of physics simply didn't apply to it. Here's where this mystery becomes truly extraordinary. This wasn't a single neighborhood or a stretch of countryside. The trail was documented across more than 30 separate towns and villages, spanning an estimated 100 miles of ground, from Exmouth on the River Yexi, north to Topsham, west toward Totnes and Torquay, and possibly as far as Dorset. 100 miles in a single night. No breaks, no resting spots, no sign of fatigue. The prints just kept going, steadily, purposefully, as if whatever left them had somewhere very specific to be and wasn't going to let a river, a wall, or a building get in the way. Residents in multiple towns compared notes and realized they were looking at the same trail, the same print, the same stride, moving through their world as if it owned it. By midday, word had spread, and fear moved even faster than the trail itself. Victorian England was a deeply religious society, and when the clergy and local farmers and townspeople gathered to look at these prints, the conclusion many reached was immediate and absolute. This was the devil. He had walked through Devon in the night. He had visited their doorsteps. He had pressed his hooves into the snow outside their homes and moved on, leaving his mark as a warning, or a taunt, or something worse. People refused to leave their homes after dark for weeks. Parents kept children inside. The name stuck immediately, the devil's footprints. Reports made it all the way to London. The Times covered the story, noting that, quote, "The superstitious go so far as to believe these are the marks of Satan himself." Even the newspaper's detached, rational tone couldn't quite dismiss the strangeness of what was being described. For many in those communities, no rational explanation was needed. They had seen the prints with their own eyes. They had stood at their doorsteps and looked at the mark of something that had been, impossibly, right there. Of course, not everyone turned to theology. Naturalists, farmers, and curious investigators tried to find a logical explanation. What creature could have made these marks? The candidates put forward were colorful, to say the least. Donkeys were the obvious first guess. The shape was right. But no donkey walks in a single file line, and no donkey climbs drain pipes or crosses rivers without disturbing the surrounding snow. A kangaroo was suggested. Apparently, there were private menageries in England at the time, and an escaped animal seemed plausible. But kangaroos leave two-footed hops with very different measurements, and no escaped kangaroo was ever reported. Some proposed mice, specifically, that mice hopping in snow might create impressions that looked like cloven hooves. This theory received immediate, justified skepticism. Perhaps the most creative explanation was an experimental balloon that had broken free of its moorings and dragged a shackle or anchor chain across the countryside, the chain bouncing off surfaces and leaving periodic impressions that could look like footprints. It's not completely ridiculous, but it doesn't explain prints on rooftops, or in drain pipes, or crossing rivers cleanly. Every theory had a fatal flaw. Every explanation collapsed when measured against the full extent of what was documented. Contemporary letters and reports from people who actually saw the prints that morning offer details that are hard to shake. Multiple witnesses described the impressions as looking almost melted into the snow. Not pressed in by weight, but burned or baked in, with crisp edges that didn't crumble under examination. This struck several observers as deeply unusual. Others noted how the prints clustering near doorsteps felt almost personal. Not random, not the erratic path of an animal following a scent. The trail seemed to approach dwellings. To pause, almost, then move on. One account that has haunted investigators for 170 years describes a trail that led directly into the mouth of a narrow drain pipe on the outside wall of a house, and then resumed on the other side, in a garden completely enclosed by a high stone wall with no gate and no gaps at ground level. There is no natural explanation for that. None. Over the centuries since 1855, researchers have come back to this mystery again and again. The theories have grown more sophisticated, but they haven't grown more satisfying. One modern hypothesis suggests that the event was actually multiple separate incidents. Different animals, different causes, different locations, that got stitched together into one seemingly continuous trail through a combination of excited reporting, miscommunication, and the human love of a good story. A kind of mass hysteria of documentation. It's a reasonable theory, and it might explain some of the trail, but it requires you to believe that dozens of witnesses in dozens of towns all independently generated the exact same story, the same measurements, the same single file pattern, the same impossible obstacles, without any of them coordinating. Another theory involves unusual weather. Certain snowfall and melt conditions can cause existing animal tracks to expand and distort in ways that make them unrecognizable. A normal bird hop could spread into something that looks cloven. A fox's gait could blur into a single file line. Again, plausible for some of it. Still doesn't cross that river. Still doesn't explain the rooftops. The supernatural explanation, which most modern researchers set aside, has never actually been disproven. It's just unpopular, which is not the same thing. To this day, no single explanation accounts for all the documented evidence. The mystery officially remains open. The devil's footprints didn't just disappear into history. They embedded themselves into the culture of Southwest England in ways that are still visible today. The story influenced local folklore for generations, parents telling children about the night something walked through Devon. Ghost tours still included. Local historians still argue about it. It became one of the foundational texts of modern paranormal research, cited constantly as one of the few cases where the evidence is too well documented to simply dismiss and too inexplicable to simply explain. And interestingly, similar reports have surfaced in other parts of the world at other times, single-file cloven trails appearing overnight in unusual places. Always the same pattern. Always the same inability to find a satisfying answer. Devon in 1855 was just the most famous. Here's what we know for certain. On the night of February 8th to 9th, 1855, something moved through Devon, England. It covered an estimated 100 miles in a single night. It left a trail of cloven hoof-shaped prints in the snow. It crossed rivers, climbed walls, traversed rooftops, and apparently squeezed through drain pipes barely wide enough to fit a human hand. Nobody saw it. Nobody heard it. Nobody has ever definitively identified it. Was it an animal? A weather phenomenon? A hoax that somehow fooled 30 towns simultaneously? A coordinated mythology that sprang up overnight? Something that science has not yet named or categorized? Or, and this is the question that kept Devon's doors locked for weeks afterward, was it something else entirely? Whatever your answer, the prints were real. The witnesses were real. The mystery is real. And whatever walked through Devon that night, it's never come back. Or maybe it has, and we just haven't been paying close enough attention to the snow. Thanks for watching. If this one got under your skin, subscribe, because there are more stories where this came from, and some of them are even harder to explain.